My name is Sally Shelton. I'm the Associate Director and Collections Manager for the Museum of Geology at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City. I've been in the museum field for just at 40 years and doing conservation for 35 of those years.
My name's Kaylee Johnson, and I'm currently the Preparator and Lab Manager at South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City, South Dakota. And basically what that entails is managing the labs and the volunteers that go with it, so the equipment, making sure that nobody's hurting themselves, and then I'm also the one who gets to play with all the power tools and all the fossils and repair them and get them out of jackets. My education is pretty simple. I went from having my bachelor's degree at South Dakota School of Mines in Geology and continued with their accelerated master's program to their degree in paleontology, and spent a year and a half there and happened to stay for the job that I have currently.
What are some things that you love most about your position?
I get to play with the collections. In my previous position, even though I was working with all of the collections, I wasn't working in any of them. And I think most people who work with collections actually derive a little bit of psychological strength just from reminding them, you remind yourself why you're here, why is this important, all of that. So in this position, I've had hands-on experience with all of the collections in the building, and being able to see that you make things better at the end of the day, even if it's on a small scale, something is rehoused, or something is documented, or something is used in a classroom. Everything where you use collections to make something better feels good.
I respect that. I feel the same way. Can you talk a little bit about working with students and training them into becoming your future position?
That's the best part. I've been working intensively with students for 11 years in South Dakota, and it has been the absolute best part of the job. I know that some people are worried about the future of various fields and what are the next generations going to be like. If they're like our students, I have no concerns at all.
Where did you get this love of this work from?
I was born in Littleton, Colorado, and at a young age we moved down to southern Colorado in Trinidad, where we actually were able to purchase land in the Rocky Mountains and build a house there. So for several years that's where we lived, and having your backyards basically be a giant geological outcrop tends to do things to you. You just have that splendor of seeing the rocks where they lay, having both fossil deposits and then igneous and metamorphic rocks right next to each other. You have geology and paleontology at your fingertips, and my parents always fostered a really strong sense of independence and curiosity with the world that really goes hand in hand with science.
And explain your position currently with the Carver project that we're doing.
I was contacted about the mastodon tusk, the Hampton mastodon tusk at UNI by Nathan Arndt, because it's an iconic specimen. It's a specimen with a lot of need for care, need for conservation, and there were some time constraints that meant stabilizing this had to be the most important first task for that. So as part of that, I came here to survey the specimen in December, and it was obvious looking at it that the first and most important thing was to stabilize it physically, because it was, for all of its size and weight, it's fragile. It's been treated in multiple ways over the years with multiple materials, and it was not something that anyone could pick up or move or transport in any way. It could not support its own weight. That was when I recommended that if there was only one thing we could do in the time period, it would be to construct that kind of support, and that my colleague, Kaylee Johnson, was one of the best I have ever worked with at doing exactly that. So we brought Kaylee in on the project to help direct and supervise the construction of basic support for the specimen that gives it flexibility in the future for other kinds of support, other kinds of treatment, but which stops the greatest threat, which is its own weight and its own fragility.
So we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the mount that you're creating here at the museum. Explain the technique that you're using for our tusk.
So the technique that I'm using is been developed by Alan Zadinak from the LA County Museum in Los Angeles. And it's basically called making a clamshell jacket and is very similar in many ways to what you would think of as a classic field jacket in paleontology. A field jacket is where you excavate around a specimen and expose it enough to find its extent, and then you create a separator, and then you plaster around that separator using layers of plaster and burlap, or in our case we usually use quilt batting. But this is, once you get that specimen back, you have this field jacket. And if it's a large enough specimen, like the tusk that we have here, it's better for the specimen to keep that support, because for millions of years, and in this case, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, this specimen has been supported by the matrix or the rock that is surrounding it. So once you take away that rock, you have to find a way to support it, because otherwise it's going to fail and break on you because it doesn't have any support. So Alan decided to really come up with this concept of making these two-part jackets that are, instead of using fiberglass or burlap, we actually use fiberglass, and it reinforces the jacket, and it actually makes you able to use lighter jackets that are stronger for the specimens. And even though plaster is not archival, in this case it's the best material that we have on hand. And Alan is the one who really came up with the two-part jacket system, where you can make one half of a jacket and then develop rollers to flip over that jacket, and then create a second jacket that you can bolt together so that you can flip the specimen safely on both sides and really see both sides of your specimen.
So I'm going to finish up with this big question. What do you want people to know most about the work you do? If you had a final statement you had to make across the board.
There is a phrase in psychology called magical contagion. And the idea of magical contagion is that we find power from objects, especially when we associate them with other people. So the idea would be, if Abraham Lincoln touched this object and I touch this object, I'm touching Abraham Lincoln in my mind, and the object has power. The original objects all have power. And I tell my students, this is where our power as museum comes from. We have the original objects, we have the contacts, we can say what the history of this is and connect it to other things that people know about. Museums have power, objects have power. People have collected things since there were anything even remotely resembling people. And it's our, I think, privilege to be the ones, we spend part of our lives caring for these things so that the next generation can do the same, so that we keep things where they are so other people can benefit and learn from them and feel a little bit of that magic that comes from it. And if we forget that objects like this are the whole reasons for having museums in the first place, then we forget something that is critical.